What if the most terrifying weapon of World War II wasn't a bomb, a tank, or a ship, but a human being bolted into a rocket? By 1944, the Japanese Empire's industrial heart was failing, and their back was against the wall. They needed a miracle to stop the American steel tide. But when your factories are burning and your fuel is gone, how do you build a miracle? The answer was a machine that defied every rule of aviation: the MXY-7 Ohka. It was a weapon designed not to survive the battle, but to ensure that the pilot died with maximum efficiency. But how do you convince a human mind to become a literal guidance system? To understand the Ohka, you have to stop thinking of it as a plane. If you looked under the skin, you wouldn't find the sophisticated electronics of a modern missile. So, what was actually inside this cherry blossom? It was a brutalist cocktail of wood, tin, and 3 solid fuel rockets. The wings were made of plywood. The body was thin aluminum. And the nose? The nose was 2,600 pounds of pure tri-nitroanisole explosive. There was no landing gear, no parachute, no way out. Once the canopy was locked from the outside, the pilot ceased to be a man and became a component. But if this machine was so primitive, why did the U.S. Navy fear it more than any traditional fighter? Imagine the sensory nightmare of the thunder gods. You are sitting in a seat made of plywood, 20,000 feet in the air, bolted under the belly of a lumbering bomber. The smell of high-octane fuel and ozone fills your lungs. You can hear the wind screaming against the thin metal skin just inches from your head. You have exactly 1 joystick and 3 buttons. You aren't flying. You are waiting for the release. But here is the terrifying question. What goes through a man's mind in the 60 seconds between the drop and the impact? Is it duty? Or is it the sudden cold realization that he is riding a funeral pyre at 600 miles per hour? The Americans gave it a nickname: the Baka bomb, the idiot bomb. They mocked it as a desperate, foolish waste of life. But was it really a failure? When an Ohka was released, it didn't behave like a plane. It ignited its rockets and became a screaming meteor. It was too fast for anti-aircraft guns to track, and too small for fighters to hit. It hit with the kinetic energy of a falling mountain. If the Ohka was so unstoppable in the air, why didn't it sink the entire U.S. Pacific Fleet? The answer lies not in the bomb itself, but in the bottleneck of the mothership. If the Ohka was an unstoppable rocket, why did so many pilots die without ever seeing an American ship? The answer lies in the mothership. The Ohka had no range. It had to be carried to within 20 miles of the target by a Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber. But the Betty was a flying gas tank, so fragile it was nicknamed the one-shot lighter. When you strap a 4,700-pound suicide bomb to its belly, it becomes a slow, lumbering target for every Hellcat pilot in the Pacific. So, the question wasn't just, could the Ohka hit? It was, Could the bomber even get close enough to let it go? What happens when the release handle is finally pulled? Imagine the sudden, violent silence as you drop into the abyss until you hit the ignition. 3 solid fuel rockets kick in, and suddenly you are traveling at nearly 600 miles per hour. This wasn't flying, it was a ballistic trajectory. At these speeds, the wooden wings vibrated so violently they threatened to shatter. The pilot had to fight the controls with every ounce of strength just to stay on target. But if you could keep it steady, you were traveling too fast for any gunner on Earth to track. Was anything, even the thickest armor of a battleship, safe from a 1-ton explosive traveling at Mach 0.8? Where do you build a weapon that requires no return? By 1945, Japan's cities were firebombed ruins, so the industrial Noir of the Ohka moved underground. They built them in damp, dark tunnels carved into the sides of mountains. These weren't factories. They were tombs. The assembly lines were manned by students and young women working by candlelight, breathing in the fumes of toxic lacquer and rocket fuel. There was no quality control, only the desperate knowledge that each machine they finished was a coffin for a boy their own age. But in this darkness, did they ever stop to wonder if they were building a defense or just a more efficient way to surrender? Was the Ohka the ultimate weapon or the ultimate tragedy? On April 12, 1945, a single Ohka struck the destroyer USS Abele, snapping it in half in seconds. It proved the concept. The human-guided missile worked, but the cost was madness. Hundreds of bombers were lost, and hundreds of young men were sacrificed for a handful of hits that couldn't stop the inevitable. Today, a few captured Ohkas sit in museums, their wooden wings dry and their rocket tubes empty. They stand as silent witnesses to a moment in history when the machine and the human were merged into a single, terrifying instrument of despair. If the industrial age was about progress, what do we call a machine that was built only to be destroyed?